Welcome everyone to my State of Doom Emacs 2023 talk. I've noticed there's been a decent amount of discussion recently in Slack around like Doom and Space Macs and what do they do, what's the differences. So I thought I'd do my very best to fill everyone on exactly what Doom is, what's happened recently, and some exciting things coming soon. I will attempt a small demo at some point, so we'll see how well that goes. So what is Doom Emacs? Well, put simply, it's a modular configuration framework for Emacs, which is a lot of words for you basically just get a bunch of stuff out of the box for free. Similar in nature to like Space Emacs, Prelude, Centaur Emacs, there's countless others. It aims to provide a more batteries included experience for Emacs by providing what we've deemed as sensible, but somewhat less so recently opinionated defaults. However, unlike other frameworks, Doom aims to keep the package management outside of Emacs. For example, when you start up a regular Emacs, Straight or whatever you're using will attempt to pull everything at once, whereas Doom uses an external CLI to manage all the packages and pull them down when you need them. We've got a mechanism called pinning, which again is supported by Straight, where you can say, I want this package at this particular commit or this tag, and you'll never get any updates for it, which means that the versioning is very declarative. And when you do what's referred to as sync, which updates all your packages, only what's changed pin-wise will be updated. It's heavily optimized around startup time. Even with my quite deep config, I still average around 1 or 2 seconds for it to start up. The fresh Doom install starts up in about half a second on a modern version of Emacs. Very brief history. Where did this all come from? Initially, it was started by the current maintainer, Henrik Listener, as just his private config, as they all do, really. It sort of branched out. People started going, oh, I like that. Can I have this? And people started getting involved. And then he took inspiration from things like Prelude and Space Macs with the space leader key. And it just sort of, it's grown from there. I think at the moment it's very active. I think it's one of the most starred Emacs repos behind Space Macs, purely because Space Macs has been around a lot longer. So this term modular is referred to all over the place, but what exactly is a module? Well, simply put, it's just a collection of packages with some extra glue code to sort of integrate everything together. For example, the closure module currently pulls in packages like closure mode, paredit, CLJ refactor, and flycheck CLJ condo, but only when the syntax check model is enabled. And there's a lot of configuration around setting up the key bindings around the leader key. So you can do like cider jacking with just your local leader key and then an apostrophe. Integrating with Doom's pop-up system and some small LSP config, but for the most part, it's quite straightforward. Each module in Doom is grouped by a number of keywords that can include optional flags noted by a plus. In this example on the slide here, we've got :editor, which means it's in the editor category. The module name is LSP, and there's an optional plus flag to enable functionality around eglot. As I mentioned before about Doom offloading a lot of the work to the CLI, the primary purpose for that is to perform an operation called sync, which will perform any defined package management options. And if you're using a literate org-based config, it'll also tangle your config and then run everything after that. And also runs through a bunch of internal steps. As you can see on the slide, it does things like sorting out the bytecode. It'll do ELN compiling if it needs to be. And then it merges all the auto loads together. And there's also a Doom sync-u, which will update everything that's unpinned to a new pin, or if you've if you've unpinned a package, which means I just want the latest changes, it will make sure that it grabs all of those. And the last primary one is Doom upgrade, which will pull all the latest changes from Doom and then perform a Doom sync-u afterwards. And by far the coolest feature available with this CLI is you can actually use it to make your own CLI tools. For example, here I've got a screenshot where I've just defined just using a simple macro, def CLI bang. The bang is sort of Doom syntax for this is a Doom macro. I've defined a macro called publish, which just runs through my config and creates an HTML output. And as you can see from the second output down here, if I do Doom help and I do a simple rip grep for publish, you can see that it shows up here. So all I have to do is Doom publish. As long as the CLI is present, the CLI.el is present in the path, and it'll just run that. So now we try and attempt a demo. So this is the standard install that you get out of the box. You can see down here, Doom loaded everything in about half a second. So it's quite fast out of the box. You've got this nice little sort of helper menu here to give you a bunch of useful commands. If we start with just opening the private configuration, you've got 3 files. You've got init.el, which is the file that's loaded first and defines all the modules that you've got loaded. You've got config.el, which is just your local config stuff. And then at the bottom, you've got packages.el, which is the list of all the packages that you want to install. So if we open init.el, and I make that a tiny bit bigger. So there's this large Doom macro body here. You see we've got the categories like input, and there's a few models underneath it, which don't include it by default because they're quite opinionated. Not everyone needs Chinese input or Japanese input. Then you've got like completion down here, and we've got a large number of UI changes, editor stuff related to bare bones Emacs, so we improved DORED and stuff. Your terminal extensions, syntax check, spell check, grammar check. I think the grammar check module is overdue for a refactor. And then you've got various tools to integrate with, like Ansible, JUXT, LSP, Magit, a bunch of lang modules. So for specific languages like F# or Erlang or whatever, there's a bunch there. Email support, because Emacs can do everything, including email. And then we've got a few apps like Calendar, I think that's music, Emacs Everywhere, which means you can run Emacs and it'll like populate stuff from your text boxes. And then at the bottom here, we've got things like literate config, which means everything tangles from a single org file. And then you've got the default bindings, which you can use to enable evil mode for everything. And if we hop over to the config, it just includes some very straightforward config. This is where you put like any changes that you want to do for certain modules, or your set queues or your defuns. There's a lot of comments here that explain what should go here and what shouldn't go here, and how to use some of the built-in macros like after bang, which will run this body after the package has been loaded. There's a list more down here, a few more, and that's fully documented over on the GitHub. And last, if we just have a look at packages.el, quite simply, again, it's all nicely commented. You see that's an example of defining this package that we want to pull from Melpor or Elpor or whatever. You've got an example here of pulling it straight from GitHub, pulling it with specific files. And we've got an example down here of a pin to say I want built-in package to be pinned to this commit, which means no matter what I do, unless I change this, that will always be the same. If you want to override something, you can just say like unpin, or you can just define your own package with your own pin. And then when you do doom sync-u, that'll update. Your config always takes precedence over the built-in Doom stuff. So if I hop back to my slides and go to the actual window. So what's changed recently? Well, the largest recent change has been the introduction of a so-called profile system, which is functionally very similar to an existing tool called Chemacs, CHEMACS, if anyone's come into contact with it. If you remember from the output of Doom Sync at the bottom, there was the mentions of profiles being updated. If I jump back to it quickly, I can't actually see it now. Oh yeah, no, rebuilding profile in local etc at. So then we jump back. Yeah, there's mention of profiles being updated, powering something that will be talked about in a couple of slides for more transactional package management. A profile system was introduced as a way to allow you to just jump between specific versions of the future transactional package management, but at the current moment, it just exists as an alternative to Chemacs. So you can have like multiple profiles side by side. You can have like, it doesn't have to be Doom, it can be Space Max, it can be regular Emacs, whatever. I think I've got like 4 or 5 for demoing various things and testing stuff. The profile system's got a lot more changes coming soon, such as being able to generate profiles for use in the current sandbox, and some upcoming transactional package management changes. A couple of new modules that have been added, a simple GraphQL module, which provides a nice sane GraphQL experience with a bunch of fontification and some extra config stuff. And there's support for a .graphql config file, which lets you provide some automation around querying the external schema so you get better completion locally. The LSP server is a little bit buggy with it. That's mostly thanks to the wonderful NPM ecosystem, which I'm sure everyone loves. But for the most part, completion and queries runs about as you'd expected. There's also org babel support. So if you've got a code block in an org file and you put some GraphQL in it, you can execute it and you'll get the results in a buffer. As well as that, predating Emacs 29 getting native tree sitter support was added for the elisp tree sitter package, which defines a bunch of modules for something called tree sitter, which very, very quickly provides a way for you to use scheme queries to like define an AST for the whole of your document. So you can have like, this is a code block, this is what a function looks like, this is what various bits look like, to create a whole AST of the whole document. So you can just sort of navigate around, and it includes a bunch of grammars for that and a bunch of text objects for evil, so that you can go like delete around function, and it'll delete around a function defined in whatever language it is without needing like complicated regular expression to figure out what a function is in various languages. It will need a refactor because it doesn't handle the recently integrated Emacs 29 tree sitter, which is fundamentally quite different, but it also has the same outcome, so the user won't see anything really. Documentation, everyone loves writing documentation. Unfortunately, because of the nature of the project, most of it lives in Henrik's head. So we've had to sort of almost coerce him to try and write stuff down so that we can all chip in and help him. Over time, that is changing. We've got a decent amount documented. That this page here goes through a decent amount of detail, but there's always room for more. Viewing the documentation with Emacs is always the best way because there's a lot of nice fontification around some of the readmes. In fact, I'll probably show that in a little while. In fact, I might be able to demo it now. If I jump back to the init.el and I go for the readme of this module, yeah, you can see that there's some fontification around the package here. You can see that this package hasn't been installed because it's yellow, whereas this package has been installed. The tools LSP module in this current instance hasn't been enabled, so that's sort of grayed out. The company module has been installed, so that's sort of highlighted. Sort of fontifications like that. I do the right, nope. Okay. So the fontification inside Emacs is always going to be preferable. There's only so much you can do with exporting that to HTML. So what's coming next? Well, first up, splitting up the core pieces of Doom itself. By nature, it is quite large. People have been asking for some time that they just want certain bits and pieces, just a couple of macros. They don't want to have to pull the entirety of Doom. So at some point, very, very soon, that's going to be split into just the core functionality of Doom itself, a core set of modules, which is pretty much just the current list of modules that we've got, and something else called community modules, which will just be a repo like Melpa or Elpa, but it'll be sort of a bit higher level because it'll just be curated modules that the community have submitted, managed by us, but we don't have to worry about maintaining them. The people that submit it will maintain those. And next we have transactional package management, similar to Nix. Each change to the package that you make, so every time you change the pins and you do a Doom sync, a new profile will be created as a generation that can be rolled back to or at any point, or managed similar to any other profile. Basically, exactly the same as Nix, basically. There'll also be like the facility for once you've generated a profile, you'll be able to integrate it directly with Nix for like specific versions of Emacs. So you can create a profile and then say, I want to run this profile with Emacs 27 because Henrik uses as his primary OS. So there's going to be a lot more fun stuff around Nix coming. There's going to be some more generalizing of the CLI tool to become more like a general purpose elisp development tool, providing things like linting and testing, a bit like Cask or eask or LDev, similar tools like that, with a lot nicer, with a lot more emphasis on it just being like a general elisp development helper. Improve CI, self-explanatory. Automate some more annoying tasks like bumping packages and adding tests. If every time we have to sort of go through and manually bump all the packages that change for a module, if like Magit gets a change, that's a bunch of packages that we have to update, and just making that a bit more easy to automate. Profile generation on the fly relates to something called the sandbox, which lets you run specific components of Doom. So you can either just run native Emacs, Emacs with some of Doom core, Emacs without your config, or Emacs and your config. And once the profile generation comes in, you'll be able to specify which profile you want to run within the sandbox to create a slightly less transient sandbox. On the fly module activation just refers to every time you open a file or something, there'll be a simple check, is there a module for this? And it'll go, do you want to install this module? And it will then go through and install and set that module up for you. So you open up a closure file, it'll say, do you want to install the closure module? You'll do that, and then magically you'll get LSP and all that funky stuff. Recursive modules is something we've hit recently. We've got separate F# and C# modules because they're technically they are very different languages, but they have a very shared ecosystem. So for a specific dependency, we have to maintain two separate pins of it. We have to update them both twice, but it doesn't make sense for it to be a .NET module because they're so fundamentally different. So there's going to be a concept of sort of a recursive module where you can say within the .NET module, there are two other modules, F# and C#, and it will lend itself to adding like a Visual Basic module if anyone uses it. And then we have the ability to manage external modules as you do with packages. So at the moment, that would also allow other people to pull their Doom modules into their config without specifically needing Doom. A module will be treated just the same as any other package, and it'll like tree shake the bits of Doom that it needs. So it'll only pull like specific macros if they're defined. So you won't even need to do anything different. You just require the package and you'll get it. Also on the cards is a simplified installation wizard, which will let you like choose which modules you want and a few other questions about like themes and what font you want to use and stuff. And last on the list, we have a few modules that are currently being worked through. The top one is adding in Corfu as a completion front end with the view to replace company as the default. Corfu and company basically do the same thing, but Corfu is a lot simpler, a lot easier to manage, and there's a lot more flexibility with it. A large refactor of the formatting library, the module, which will format code using various defined formatters like use ESLint for JavaScript buffers and Markdown and whatnot, to use a package called Ophelia, which is a lot simpler than the current module, which is, I think, format all the code, which we've had to pin to a very old version because there was a massive change that we couldn't account for. And the last one is a module for creating interactive tutorials in Emacs by Ticosaur. So you'll like define a simple tutorial using a simple macro, and then you'll be able to have like a bunch of text, and there'll be tests to make sure that you've actually passed the stage of the tutorial, and then it'll move to the next one. That'll be coming when he has some free time. That's just a taster. That's by no means the limits of everything. At the moment going through the PRs, there's tons of new modules and new features. We're getting new people constantly. So there's a few places that you can find us. At the moment, the primary one is Discord. We've been having a lot of talk about moving over to Matrix, but it just requires us to sort of sit down and plan it and start moderating it and stuff, and then eventually moving over. But that's the primary place. We've also introduced a Discourse server to sort of better facilitate Q&A, because Discord is not suited for question and answers at all. So that we've introduced that, and that seems to have gone down quite well. It's a lot more searchable than Discord, because Discord you have to join the server, nothing's indexed, whereas for Discourse, everything's indexed. You Google a question, you'll get the answer out. It's much more searchable. And then lastly, we've got the GitHub repo, the GitHub organization, which has a bunch of other repos. We also maintain a couple of other packages, but it's mostly just for Doom and the website. Any questions?
One thing I saw that I didn't understand is when you showed the documentation in org mode, that it was coloring things differently depending if you had it installed or not. Is that like a magic trick of org mode, or is there something?
That's a magic trick that of Doom. Yes, you can colorize different keywords depending on different circumstances. I think if I just pull it back up.
Yeah, but it was just an org mod file. How did it? Well, it's just an extra thing on top of org mod, I guess.
Yeah, it's just using
mod.
font lock to say that this thing that looks like I can't remember how to turn it off. I think it's the minor mode, pretty mode. No, I can't remember how to turn it off, but it's just a specially formatted link. So then FontLock will go through and say, this is a Doom module. You see at the bottom in the echo area, it recognizes that it's a Doom module, it's tools ALSP, and it's currently disabled.
Smart. Okay. And one last question for me. If you suppose you have a configuration which we just use package, I don't even use straight EL, and I just have a long list of use package and some definitions and some hacks and stuff like that. What's kind of the proper way of migrating to Doom Emacs if I want to try?
So we don't do anything like fundamentally different. If we go to, if I open up the init.el, I go to a module, and then I go to its config.el. It just uses use package. It's a slightly modified macro to add in features, but for the most part, it's a superset of use package. So you pretty much just change it to use this exclamation mark macro, and for the most part, you should be fine.
Yeah. So if I want like a package and I enable it there, but I want some different configuration, I just override that configuration that I need.
Yep, exactly that. Your config always takes priority over whatever's defined in Doom, so you override as much or as little as you want.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. Sounds good.
Cool.
Do you presumably though you only end up with the like in your packages.l there, Ellis, you only end up with those packages mentioned that aren't like some of the core supported in the core of Doom? Right.
Yes. Those will be anything external that you want to do, or if you want to update the pin of a package. So say right here, we've got company, it's the full 12-character hash, but for brevity's sake, it's collapsed in this view. You've got this package company shell. If I wanted a more recent commit, I don't have to edit this. I just go into my private packages.el, define it packages company shell, and then I can change that commit to whatever I want. And I do doom sync-u, and that updates it, and then I've got the more recent version because my config takes priority.
See. I was wondering is evil mode required, and does Doom come with its own like Spacemacs? Does it have this sort of like huge number of key bindings that it basically defines itself and replaces your experience with Doom key bindings?
So required isn't fully accurate, but probably mostly accurate. You can turn it off and it'll be just as functional. Henrik and like the majority of the maintainers all use evil, so the experience is going to be built around that. But we use a specialized macro for all the key bindings called mapbang, and mapbang, if evil's not enabled, it will just map it normally. So for the most part, as long as you properly use the Doom macros, even if evil's not enabled, everything should still handle it. So it's preferred, but definitely not mandatory.
I just wanted to ask whether or not you know if it's possible when you launch Doom to have a whole bunch of projects that you've already predefined launch, because frequently I launch it and then we'll open the same projects slowly and painfully.
So all there's a module called for workspaces that allow you to, I don't know if it's defined by default. Yes, it is. So if I do like space tab n, which space tab is sort of the prefix for workspaces, right. I can create a bunch of these workspaces, and then when I can do space tab, and then I see save workspace to file, so I can save a specific workspace, which I can then restore later. Or if I go under space Q, which is the sort of the quit, you can see here that we've got restart and restore, which will just stop everything in place and then restart it exactly as it was. Nice. You can save the current session quickly, which will just save it as autosave, or I can do capital S and save it to a specific file, which is then loaded with either L to restore the autosave or capital L to restore a specific session, and that'll load up all your workspaces, that'll load all the buffers, it'll load everything apart from the state of Emacs as it was.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds perfect. Do you know what Emacs package that is? Is that?
I think it's perspectives. If I have a look at the init and then workspaces, packages. Oh, it's just persp mode. That's the only thing that's included.
Okay, cool.
I think Jan has a question.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, like, I think you mentioned it briefly, like 29, Emacs 29. So like, I've just switched to it, and I read somewhere that it's not supported at the moment. So what's the status of this? Can I, if I switch back to Emacs 29, it's going to be a mess?
So it's technically not supported, but that's only because it's not a released version yet. Henrik's been on 29 longer than all of us, I think. I've been on it for a good few months. I'd consider it stable, but purely because the fact it's not released, to save constant questions of, oh, this isn't working. Oh, it's because Emacs recently changed a commit yesterday and we haven't encountered it yet. Purely to prevent that, we say that it's not supported. So once Emacs 29 is released, it will be officially supported. And then 28 will be the furthest back. I think the current stance is we want to do one version behind so that we can sort of keep in line with a lot of major features, and we won't go anything higher than the current version. So Emacs 30, for example, if people have questions about it, we sort of just say, we try and help, but it's not the priority.
Cool. Cheers.
I just updated to 29 after discovering your config, Ellis, and it worked wonders for me. I've encountered no issues. Yeah,
it's very stable at this point. I think it's been cut not that long. No, it was cut a while ago now. It's stabilized a lot. I think it's just bug fixes for the most part now, but there's no official release. So to save a commit going up yesterday and someone rebuilding it, we have the issue. We haven't really seen it. We can't react to it. So it just makes our lives a bit easier.
Do you know, Ellis, what the engine is that's used to generate the doc site from those org files? Because it's super fast. It's like so fast.
It's actually a static website generated, I think, just using OX Publish and some CSS.
Okay.
Emacs itself has the ability to export an org file to HTML, which again is also what my config site uses. So it would just take the org file and split it out into HTML. I think he's got loads of complicated hacks and stuff, but I think for the most part it's just OX Publish. Okay.
Yeah, it's like it's just super fast. It's like
it's a static website, so all the content's on the page, all the data's there. So there's no extra JavaScript to load or anything. It's one document.
Yeah, even that tree works nicely. I was also wondering about if there's any packages. Is there ever any problem like choosing packages if you're using Doom? Are there ever any compatibility issues? Just because of the changes that you've had to make with Doom, is there ever any problems there? Is there anything that needs to be done to certain packages?
There's always problems. We hit one. What's the most recent one? Oh, recently I think. Oh, that sticks out. Someone who maintains one of the Dart packages. I don't know whether it was an accident or not, but he made the repository private, which meant that no one else could put anything. So we just sort of had to do a bit of damage control, and we had to point it to a version that was cached on, I think, Emacs Orphanage or something, and sort of just put out an announcement and say, look, this guy's made the repository private. Don't make any issues. We're fully aware of it. And then any issues that were made, we sort of just link back to that announcement. We try and keep on top of as much as we can, but there's only a small team of us. We're not aware of everything.
I also was wondering about profiles, and this is maybe a question for others as well. Like, is anyone actually using different profiles? And if so, are you using them for like different languages, like having like a web sort of setup and then, like a backend closure sort of profile, or is there any other things? I'm just sort of interested in like things that people are using profiles for that I wouldn't have thought of. I mean, I know not a lot of people are going to be using them in Doom, but is anyone using different profiles in any other way?
So the high level thinking of profiles is more for like the different kinds of configs. Like you might want to try out Doom, but you don't want to wipe out your setup, but you also want to be able to load your config up. Or maybe you want to quickly try out Spacemacs or someone else's config. Or one that I use it for probably the most is I'm trying to isolate this bug, and it only happens in specific configurations. So I try and get the minimal possible Doom config. And then I'll just add bits to it until I can try and reproduce the bug. It's also, I think a lot of it's sort of piggybacking off Emacs 29's recent introduced feature, which you can pass init directory as a flag, and then you pass it a directory, and then Emacs will load everything from that, as opposed to the default directories, so you can quickly spin up like a temporary sandbox to test bugs and test features without it actually affecting or loading anything that you've defined. So it's basically just a wrapper around that to let you quickly define packages, and it'll only get better once the transactional package management. I think that's what it's primarily designed for. You can roll back to a specific generation, like in Nix, you roll back from like generation 141 to 138. Those all have profiles defined for them. It just also happens that you can use it similar to how Emacs handles the profiles. But yeah, I'd be curious if anyone else uses profiles for anything else.
Don't see any more hands up, Ellis. So
I
yeah,
assume not then.
that's the end of your grilling from the JUXT Emacs community. Yeah, thanks a lot for that, Ellis. I'm sure like there's a lot of people that are going to be inspired to try Doom, and you are clearly very involved in spending a lot of time like improving this and making it better. So presumably you can help people out, or people can I guess any questions and things people should take to the official channels.
Yeah, ideally there's a Clojurians channel for it, but I'm pretty much the only person monitoring it. So if you're really stuck and it's not Clojure related, it's better asked on the Discord or the discourse.
Excellent. Well, yeah, thanks again, Ellis.
Cheers. Thanks.
Cheers, Ellis.